had. At the time, the now former was actually still deputy president in 1998, when serious questions were raised about who we are and his characterization. And then former President Mbeki said, a country of two nations. And it's an analogy and an analysis that continues to come up. Whether you go to writings in 2018, when we were 20 years away from that time, whether you go to writings in recent time, and whether you look at the census. I just had a chance to peruse and browse some of the outcomes of the census 2022, and really does continuously paint this picture of one country, of one nation that has its material conditions with access to a developed economy, physical, educational, communication, and other infrastructure. But you still have that second and larger nation that was characterized back in 1998, that is, lives under conditions of a grossly underdeveloped economic, physical, educational, communication, and other infrastructure. And you just have to look at the depopulation of certain provinces and the growth of the province of Gauteng. I mean, in provinces such as the Eastern Cape, people no longer feel that they have, a life. Now, I know that somebody during the Q&A discussion with Bishop Mbumlwana challenged our categorization. At that time, the more affluent nation was categorized as this, white, and the larger nation as black and poor. Now, we've got to then ask if we even have consensus on the parameters of our discussion when we talk about a nation building and the making of a common nation. Because if we don't have common parameters of the kind of discussion we should have and how we characterize the discussion, perhaps we will never find an answer to this issue, and we will continue to remain in the place where we talk about these things, but they actually do not make sense to us. And I'm going to take from a book of somebody who thought of breaking a rainbow, building a nation, and that was the book by Representative Chikane, who is a brother and an academic as well. And in that book, and he was drawing experiences from the fees must fall moment where he was involved, and of course momentarily imprisoned in Cape Town. And he says in his book, in one of the pages, the rejection of the Rainbow Nation narrative and its consequences will be a strong theme through this book. As such, it is essential to understand that my use of this concept of rejection is reliant on a distinction between young people who are born free, coconuts, and those who are born into bondage. In what can be considered a myth turned truism, there is a belief that every young South African born after 1994 is born free. That we all will be inherently, or by circumstance, able to climb a ladder in life that leads to prosperity because we are all apparently equal. Coconuts, born frees, and those born into bondage are all forced to internalize this truism, even though only one group can actualize it. So that's just me trying to set the parameters of the conversation that we are trying to have, because it's easy to say, yes, we can discuss this nation building, this nationhood, making of a common nation with commitments to public values. Of course, I'm glad that the politicians are not here because, well, there are some are retired. But the active politicians, I'm definitely glad they're not in this room, because when you speak of questions of public morality and common values, they quickly ask whose morality matters. And that strays us from the attempt of trying to create some convergence and consensus. So I will be giving more to my panelists to actually be the ones who drive. I just thought, as a young person, it's always discomforting to start speaking in a room full of elders seated. So I thought I'd stand up just as a sign of respect to my elders. Wow. So Felicity Harrison, I'm going to start off with you just to make some remarks, but I think, Bishop Bumrana's opening remarks have already started to draw us to the complexity of this idea of, some common values and nation building, and how do we negotiate? And I'm sure even putting this gathering of, the interfaith, communities was not easy. Because some would say, oh, you are more traditional, no, you are charismatic, you are more regulated, no, you are less theological, you are more theological than the others. Just take us through in your opening remarks as well, as people listen to you and as we open this panel, how do we negotiate this complexity? Because at the end of the day, on the other side, we must emerge having negotiated the complexity.
Gosh, if I knew that, I think I would be able to write a book and probably earn millions, but I will try. So thank you to everybody for being here today. It's lovely to see you all again today. I think that the first thing that I want to say is that we need to problematize the concept of the nation. Nations as a concept is a constructed, Nations are contested constructs, but they're largely held to be a social construct that contains a group of people who share a common culture, a common religion, a common language, and a common history. And I think that all of us would agree that while there are variations on this, that South Africa does not fit into the definition of what we traditionally call a nation. Nations are often associated with states, and these are seen as largely homogeneous groups. But South Africa is a nation of many cultures, many religions, many languages, and many histories. And that continues into the many presents. My experience as a white middle-class woman is very different from my contemporaries, who may come from different areas, have different genders, and have different incomes to me. So I think the ability to having a South African identity fosters xenophobia, which is already a problem in our society. I think we need to go back to Cape Town and recognize that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. If we are going to have public values, we're going to also need to have a common understanding of what these are. So the data that we have from the South African Reconciliation Barometer, we asked one question, which was, what is reconciliation? And we all assume that we have a common understanding of what reconciliation is. In the last survey, we had 14 different words to describe what reconciliation is. And I think that when we come up with common values, we need to guard against having a common language which has very different understandings. So where do we need to derive these values from? I think that in my understanding, we need to look at the values of the Constitution, the values that we have from our faith-based communities, and also values from transitional justice. The Constitution has become a very contested document, and I think it should be. It needs to be a living document. But I would argue that the values of the Constitution have not failed. I don't believe we've ever tried them at all. It is an aspirational document which has never become a reality. And I think that we need to work towards bridging the gap between what the Constitution says and the lived reality of many of our fellow South Africans. I think in terms of our religious communities, this is an incredibly important source of values in our society. South Africa is a society which is very much faith-based. All faiths have a common commitment to life, to dignity, to the duty of the state to care for the vulnerable, the right to work, the preferential option for the poor, environmental justice, subsidiarity, the right to participate in political and social life, and the economic life of the country, and inclusion. And I think that these can be our founding principles. We don't have to go terribly